Welcome to the Not Even Wine with Dinner podcast. I'm your host, Kristen, and we are here to talk about all things life, love, loss, and liquor. So let's uncork the bottle and get this party started. Well, hello, everybody. This is Kristen, and you are listening to the Not Even Wine with Dinner podcast, EP episode 15. The title of this, if it doesn't get banned off the platforms, is Heavy Drinking, the Long, Slow Suicide. So I want to put a trigger warning in just because I'm using that word. I'm not necessarily discussing suicide as an active action, I guess is the best way to put it. I am talking about how things start to break down and it ends up that drinking can kill people. So I just want to throw that out there. Again, the title may change depending on how this works when I actually publish this podcast. So we will see. So let's go. All right. So today, what I want to do to start with is I want to read part of the story of the same title. I write on Medium. For those of you who don't know, I write under the same name, Not Even Wine with Dinner. So let me get my story ready here. And I want to read the introduction to the story before I get into the nuts and bolts of it. Okay, so here we go. The title is Reality Check of the first section. When the hospital called to talk to me about my sister, they connected me with a hospice nurse. What the actual fuck, I thought. Why am I talking to a hospice nurse, I asked, confused but not ignorant. Your sister is in stage 4 liver disease. She has about 2 months to live, she replied. I'm sorry. We like to think that our drinking is casual, normal, not a problem, until you get a call like this. When I got my sister's medical records from a hospital she'd been to the previous year, it showed she was in stage 1. When asked, she stated that she, quote unquote, drank casually. I call bullshit. I know my sister knew she had a problem, but her ego got the best of her. Instead of talking to us about it, she didn't want to burden us with her, quote unquote, problem. I wish she had. Oof. Every time I read that, it just gives me goosebumps because it was a horrible, horrible, traumatic experience. My sister died of cirrhosis. For those of you who were not aware, or maybe you're a new listener, and we didn't know. We knew that she might be drinking, but we all lived in different states. We were going through the pandemic. We all had things going on in our lives, and we did not realize it was as bad as it was until it was too late. So this is what I want to talk about today. Is how drinking can catch up to us when we're not really, it's like we know, but we don't know. All right, so let's start with when we're young. And I'm going to use myself as an example. When we're young, we're drinking for acceptance and to be cool. I started experimenting with alcohol when I was 13 years old and continued to drink for the next, 30, 35 years. A lot of kids or teens do it because they're trying to get accepted into a group. They are struggling with self-esteem issues. It makes them feel better. Maybe it makes them popular, or it just gives them that boost that they're looking for. Maybe they get accepted. Maybe they get laughed with or laughed at in a good way. And so that's why they start drinking. And then when we move into our 20s, it could be that it's more acceptable because, we've been in college and obviously college university life. There's a lot of drinking going on there. There is a lot when you start getting into your early career days. Maybe there's happy hours and you've got parties and client events, corporate events, trade shows. All of those things tend to be under the umbrella of alcohol. It's very rare that there are big corporate events that are sober. So it becomes part of this accepted culture that we live in that you should drink when you're involved in your work. And, let me give you a side note here. The fact that we're in 2026 and the sober curious movement and the sobriety movement is moving up is huge. But that does not mean that it's fully accepted to be sober or that it's considered normal to be sober. It is definitely on the uptick, which is amazing and great because people are realizing how dangerous alcohol is, but it is still part of a culture. And when you're young, we use that stupid term adulting, and it makes you feel adult. When you get out of your house and you leave your parents' house, especially when you're part of my generation, Gen X, you wanted to get out of the house. You didn't want to live at home, or you had the ability to move out and be able to afford an apartment or eventually buy a house. And you wanted to get out and have that freedom. And part of that freedom for a lot of people is being able to drink freely. So that's kind of what happens, and it becomes very acceptable. I've got down in my notes, it's normal. And I encourage you to go back, if you haven't already, listened to episode 12, which is just titled, You Drink Normal. If you've listened before, you've heard me say that one of the things that I heard a lot when I was trying to get sober was, well, why'd you quit drinking? You drink normal. And most people's normal isn't healthy unless you are drinking, how do I want to put this? Unless you're drinking just an occasional glass of wine, maybe a beer or two when you're watching a game, or you're at some dinner and you have one or two cocktails, that is more or less a normal drinker. And that was something that I learned from a therapist that I had years ago who had a long-standing history as a counselor in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And once you start getting beyond that, you're drinking more, you're binge drinking, you're drinking daily, then you're not normal. That drinking is not considered normal. So let me tell you about a 2008 incident where, I was living by myself in Chicago. I drank a lot. I had a lot of stuff going on. I've actually written about this on Medium, so I'll link the lengthy story. But the long and the short of it, I was putting up my Christmas tree. I was by myself. I was having a good time listening to my cool vintage lounge music, putting all my Christmas stuff up, and I was drinking and drinking and drinking, and I had smoked a joint. And so I had a huge binge, and I just basically did everything to excess until I've put the last bauble on and then eventually crashed, passed out. The next day, I got up, got ready for work, and got in my car and drove to the corporate offices of Crate and Barrel. And I had a meeting. And then when I finished the meeting, I was on my way back downtown into the loop of Chicago to go to the photo studio where I worked. And I started having shaking. My whole right side started to tremble and started to shake. And it got to where it was almost uncontrollable in my leg. And I started to panic because I thought I was having a stroke. So I went to work, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually, I ended up in the hospital and went to the ER. And it turned out I was having the DTs. I was having detox issues and side effects. And my psychiatrist happened to see my name on the roster and walked in and was like, "Why are you here?" And as we talked about what was going on, he was fuming mad. He's like, how did I not know that you drank? You shouldn't be drinking on your medication, et cetera, et cetera. And that stemmed more discussion in my therapy sessions at the time, where my therapist said, have you blacked out before? Yes. How many times? I don't know. Have you had hangovers before? Yeah. How many times? Oh, countless. You binge drink? Yes. How many times? I don't know. So it just went on and on and on. And she's like, do you realize what you're doing is not normal? This is not normal drinking behavior. There are people who have a glass of wine on occasion and never have a hangover, never have a detox, episode. That's normal drinking. She said, what you're doing is not. That's a problem. And she gave me a checklist about alcoholism that I failed miserably. So, all right. So where I'm going with this is, again, back to the whole you drink normal thing. I'm tying these in together. And I want to talk about a few things with your body and what happens. And okay, so I don't know what year it was. It doesn't really matter. But my father had prostate cancer and he had to have surgery. When he came out of surgery, his surgeon walked in the room. You're doing well. Everything looks great. We got everything under control, blah, blah, blah. But he said, I want to ask you a question. It's pretty personal. You don't have to answer me if you don't want to. And he said, did you drink heavily when you were younger? And my dad said, well, yeah, I was in the Navy and I was stationed in Taiwan. We drank all the time. We were drinking bottles of vodka and beer and this and that. He said, why? Why do you ask? He said, because I already knew. He said, because I saw your liver. Your liver looks like a sponge and the liver never lies. And I just remember that sticking with me. And my sister as well, ironically. He said, it looks like a sponge. And I want to give you a quote that I've pulled from the University of Chicago Medicine. A liver with no cirrhosis can repair itself and regain normal function if followed with treatment and sticking to the treatment. However, once cirrhosis develops, the liver cannot usually repair itself. So when you think about what you're doing when you're drinking, think about your liver. You've only got one liver. And what I'm about to say, I know from not my personal experience, but the personal experience of close friends of mine who have lost family members. So it's not so much hearsay as I kind of witnessed it with them. But I've actually heard people say, oh, almost in a joking fashion, like if something happens to me, I'll just have a liver transplant. And again, I'm not speaking on behalf of every medical facility in the world or in the country or wherever you are. But to my knowledge, and from the experiences that I have heard and that I have seen, in order to get a liver transplant, especially for alcoholism, you have to be sober, like not a drop, for 6 months. And what tends to happen with people is by the time they reach the point where they are in bad shape, it's too far gone. They won't last. That was kind of what happened with Robin, my sister. It was too late. By the time I got the call, she had collapsed. She went in the hospital. Then I got a call from a hospice nurse, and they said, "Oh no, her stomach is extremely distended. We're going to have to drain her, and she's yellow." So that was that. And I knew as soon as I heard the symptoms that she had that there was nothing that was going to be able to be done. Because if you're that bad off, if you have, her stomach was apparently looked like she was about 9 months pregnant. They had to drain the fluid because the liver was no longer working and no longer functioning. So 6 months was not an option. So a transplant was not an option. I'm not saying this to scare anybody, or maybe I am. Maybe this is like for my Gen X friends, it's like the movie Scared Straight. It's like trying to explain to somebody, if you don't fix this before it's too late, then it's just too late. And that's why I call it the long, slow suicide. Because in a case like my sister's or a case like mine, I never got to that point, obviously. I'm here talking about it today. But I know in the depths of my heart, my sister did not want to die. I know in the depths of my heart, my sister was not drinking with the intention of killing herself. Never, 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 never. If anything, my sister was afraid of death because we would talk about it. She did not want to die. She had a lot of health issues prior to. She had had ovarian cancer in 2006 and went through quite a bit afterwards. She was in remission, but she had a lot of side effects from chemotherapy. And so she would get very nervous and very scared about her health issues. Meanwhile, she was drinking because she had a lot of other, things going on in her life that she couldn't really handle without alcohol, or at least she thought she couldn't handle them without alcohol. So it basically became an unintentional suicide. She killed herself. She drank herself to death in a long and slow and, I predict, painful way because she didn't seek out the help that she needed. It's like when something's not good for you, but you keep doing it. This almost ties in. I don't think I've done a podcast episode on this, but I've written a lot about it, and I've done some workshops about preventative versus prescriptive movement, because I'm a yoga instructor. And what I mean by that is preventative movement is preventative. It's like preventative diet. It's, doing things to prevent having disease, doing things to prevent premature death, doing things to prevent your body aging quicker than it needs to. And prescriptive is when you reach that point where you didn't do anything preventative. You ate bad, drank bad, smoked bad, moved bad or badly. And then you have to go to a doctor who is essentially a stranger in your life and say, fix me or help me. And unfortunately, that's what happens with a lot of people who become addicted, is that they're, I genuinely don't think anybody starts out wanting to be an addict or wanting to be an alcoholic. And we know better at some point in our life, whether it is being the 13-year-old kid that's drinking the beer when you know you shouldn't drink a beer, or you kind of know in the back of your head, even if your family are all alcoholics, there's something in your DNA that usually tells you, I shouldn't be doing something that's not good for me. But then we reach that point in our lives where the switch just doesn't go off anymore and we keep doing it. So the reason I'm recording this today is because it's like, for those of you who are in the stage where you have an issue and you are identifying as sober curious, these are the things I really want you to take to heart. If you get to a point of liver damage, there is a point of no return. And that's why I really wanted to talk about the body today, because, I do talk a lot about self-esteem issues and peer pressure and the mental side of it. And so, a lot of times I think that the mental and emotional side is obviously what keeps us to continue drinking. I'm not saying there's not a physical addiction, but I've had people say to me, I don't think I can get through the day without that drink because I look forward to it and it makes me calm down. Calming down is something that you're thinking about emotionally and mentally, but you're not thinking, I shouldn't do this because it might damage my liver. Now, maybe you're far along enough that you're already starting to have those effects, but this is just a warning. This is a warning. I genuinely feel like heavy drinking does become this long, slow suicide because, there's that switch in our brain that says, I shouldn't be doing this anymore. And I'm not saying it's easy. I want to make sure that I clarify that. I know quitting any substance you're addicted to is not easy. But if you came as far as to listen to this podcast, you're probably not the drunk or the alcoholic that is in the gutter, that has got no home, that is, in the depths of being destitute. You are here because you're curious. You're curious about sobriety. You're curious. You clicked on this button for a reason. So, my message to you is to just take this to heart, that eventually the body can't handle it. The body cannot handle it. And I watched it happen and it was painful. It was painful to watch. Just don't find yourself in that situation where you have to go to a stranger and say, help me. I'm not saying you shouldn't go to your doctor, but start by going to your friends. Again, you're here, you're sober curious, and you're listening to this for a reason. When I walked into, I don't talk about this a lot, or I haven't yet on the podcast, and I need to do a whole episode about my sister's death, because that's why I'm here. This is why this whole movement took off the way it did with me, why I started writing about it, why I started talking about it. When I had to make these decisions for my sister, and again, if you haven't heard my story, I will link that story as well in the show notes. I got a phone call. She had collapsed. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version. And then I had to scramble to try to get help for her because she was single. She didn't have any type of planning. She didn't have a will or a POI. So I had to scramble from Guatemala to deal with the Michigan court system in order to get emergency guardianship over my sister. And it was a brutal situation. It was very, very stressful. And then I had to fly up there, and I also had to pick out a hospice facility to put her in. So let me tell you, that's horrible because you're trying to pick something based on websites. Then when you go in and look at reviews, they're all horrible. For every 2 good ones, there's 10 bad ones. And I don't care what facility you're looking at, unless you are a private pay family and you are able to pay $5,000 to $10,000 a month for hospice or assisted living or elder care or memory care, whatever, any kind of care is very expensive. And most insurance doesn't cover it. Luckily, she was on Medicaid, and so there were a few facilities, but they weren't the nicest, and that was literally it. We didn't have the money to pay for that type of a facility. So she went where she went. I picked the best that I could in the situation that I was put in, and then I had to fly up to Michigan and basically see my sister on her deathbed. I don't wish that on my worst enemy. Not that I have any major enemies, but I don't wish that on the person or the people that I just don't really like the most. So you don't want to have to go through this, and you don't want to have to put anybody through this. So if, talking about it from my perspective, as somebody who did drink for a long time, you don't want to put your family and your friends through this. So think about not just yourself, but think about the people that you love. Think about your parents, your siblings, your spouse, your children, your grandparents, your aunts, uncles, and friends. Think about all the people around you who love you. There's going to be somebody out there that would rather help you now get through becoming sober than have to see you on your deathbed and see you at a point of no return when there is nothing they can do. I don't want to leave it on a horrible note like that because it does sound very doom and gloom, but it is kind of a doom and gloom situation. And I just don't want anybody to have to go through that. So I don't want this to be all heavy. There is a lot of light. There's a lot of good in the world. It is possible to get sober. So do yourself a favor and research this a little bit more. Reach out to somebody you love, reach out to an AA meeting, somebody that you know that struggled. Hell, you can reach out to me, send me a message at info@notEvenWineWithDinner.com. I am not a recovery expert or a medical expert of any kind, but I'm happy to talk or just have a conversation with you if that's what you're looking for. So I'm going to leave you on that note. I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and we will see you guys next time. So as always, stay safe, stay sober. Bye-bye. Just a quick note of the legal jargon. I am not a medical or psychiatric professional, nor am I a recovery or addiction specialist. This podcast is for information use only, and I am simply sharing my own experiences with sobriety, drinking, mental health, and wellness. I'm not here to diagnose or to treat. So if you're struggling and you feel like you are in immediate need, please contact a medical professional or call 911. Thank you guys again. Stay safe, stay sober.